In this IntelliJ tutorial, I'll be showing you how to create a new project. First, when you open up the application, you're met with this screen, where you can select a new project, open an existing one, or get one from a version control system. For us today, we're just going to select new project. Now a new screen opens, and you'll notice on the left-hand panel, there's a header that says new project. Underneath are a few languages. This is IntelliJ's built-in template generation for these individual languages. This allows you to create any sort of project under these types of languages. So right now we have Java selected, and you'll notice on the right-hand panel, the first property is the name field, and this is the name of your project. The second is the location, and this is where the project source code is going to exist. You'll notice underneath it says that there will be a folder created in this location, so you don't have to create it yourself. Now you can also create a Git repository here and use IntelliJ's internal Git tooling to do any sort of source control. Underneath this is the build system, and this gives you three selections. First is the IntelliJ build system, which will create an IML file that includes the information about your project, including the source code and how to build it. The second one is Maven, and this creates a POM file, also including the configuration and build information about your project. And the third one is Gradle, which will create a Gradle file for you. Now, if we select IntelliJ, you'll notice a few options underneath. The first one is the JDK, and this allows you to select what JDK your project is going to be running under. If we click the down arrow, you'll notice that we have a few different options here. One is registered JDKs, and this will be the JDKs that IntelliJ already has installed and notices on your system. The second is to download a JDK, and if we click this, it gives us a prompt to select the version, the type of vendor we may want, and to select the location that we want to download the JDK to. We can select any version all the way back to version 1.8 of Java, and we can select any vendor that distributes the JDK. Now, underneath the JDK are a couple selections. You can add sample code, which will add boilerplate code to your application, as well as generate code with onboarding tips, which guides you through what that code is doing. Now, underneath this, we have a drop-down for advanced settings. Here, you'll notice module name, content root, and module file location. If you want to change the module name to something different than the project name, you can do that here, as well as change where the content resides, including the source code and the module file location. These you don't usually have to change. I would normally keep these the same 99% of the time, but in a few unique cases, you may need to change these folder locations as well as the module name. Moving back up to the Maven build system and coming back down to advanced settings, there are a couple other settings here that we can change, the group ID and the artifact ID. And if you've ever used Maven repository, you'll understand what these are, but if not, the group ID just groups together all of your different artifacts so that you can install and package things together. The artifact ID is a unique identifier for the particular jar that you're going to create. You may want to change these values in case you have something unique in your build system, or you have a separate group ID or artifact ID that you're going to be naming for. Back to the Gradle, we can notice that we have a couple other options. Here we have the Gradle domain-specific language, which allows you to select between Kotlin and Groovy. Underneath advanced settings, we have a few other options. We have the Gradle distribution, which can be the wrapper or some other local installation that you have already created on your computer, as well as the Gradle version, which auto-selects to the wrapper, or you can select any individual version that Gradle has released. Underneath that, we have use these settings for future projects, and this just saves your initial properties so that on future projects you don't have to redo it. Again, just like the Maven build system, we have a group ID and artifact ID, and this is because Gradle shares the Maven repository and build steps. So moving back to the left-hand side here, we have other options for languages. Now, the majority of the properties on the right remain the same, so I won't be going over those again. But there are a few additions that you may want to consider. With Kotlin, you can select an option to use compact project structure, and this will just condense your project structure so you don't have a lot of different Kotlin files. In Groovy, we have no additional options except for to add the Groovy SDK and what version we want to choose. In Scala, we have a few other options, including the simple build tool version that we can select among a few different versions, as well as the Scala version that we can use. The download sources option allows you to download the source so you can view it when you're either debugging or doing any sort of introspective work on your project. The package prefix allows you to create some sort of package prefix that you may want to use for the rest of the project. This can be similar to the group ID that we talked about with the Maven and Gradle configurations. We can add boilerplate code just like the others, and in advanced settings, we're met with this module name once again. Now in our build system, we have simple build tool selected, but if we select IntelliJ, you'll notice a few other things have changed. Among this is selecting a Scala SDK. Now initially, you won't have one selected unless you have already installed it on IntelliJ, so we'll have to click the Create button, and it allows us to download any version that we may want. It also allows us to browse our local computer to find the SDK that we have already installed on our computer. We again get the package prefix, some boilerplate, and in advanced settings, it's the same as we've seen before. The last option is an empty project, and you'll notice that we have a lot fewer options here. This will just create an initial folder along with some metadata that defines the environment that you're working in. There will be no boilerplate code, there will be no build system, there will be nothing except for a folder containing a little bit of information about your environment. Next, on the left-hand side, we have a header for generators. And these are not IntelliJ built-in generators, but instead they are generators created by any individual vendor underneath. So these could be command line interfaces. They could be reaching out to a server and calling their specific tool or API. It could be a number of different things that IntelliJ doesn't do internally. For 90% of the projects, you're probably selecting one of the new projects up here. But in the unique case that you want to use a generator, like say Spring Boot, or you want to select a different Maven archetype, you would use these generators to create that project. So let's go down each one and explain what's going on. Now on the right side, again, you'll notice a lot of the same properties, so I'm not going to go over those. But for Maven archetype, you'll see a few new ones. One of which is the catalog, and this is where you find the different archetypes. If we select internal, that just means the ones that are provided by IntelliJ. The default location and the Maven Central are specific to either your system or the server that Maven Central is located at. Now from the archetype dropdown, we can select which archetype we want to use, or we could add one from a pre-existing repository. We also select the version of the archetype. Most of them will be 1.1 or 1.0. And we can add any additional properties, just like in the command line interface, where we can create or generate using this archetype command. Again, in advanced settings, we have group ID, artifact ID, and we select a version, which we can make whatever we want. Inside of Jakarta EE, this is the enterprise edition that allows you to create web apps or REST APIs. And under template, we can select either web application, a REST service, or make it just a library and it just be dependencies. For application server, we can create a Tomcat server or a JBoss server, and this will be running our web app or REST API. Now we have a selection for what language we want to use with Jakarta. We can select Java, Kotlin, or Groovy. It doesn't change any of the properties. Now for the build system, we've already talked about these two, but our options are Maven and Gradle. In the Spring Boot generator, we have a few more options. This will reach out to start.spring.io, and it calls an endpoint that will download source and extract it into our new project. So again, we have a language selection, we have a type selection, we have a group ID and artifact ID, we have a package name. All of these things we've talked about. We can also change the packaging from jar to war file if that's what we needed. Now you'll notice down here, instead of a create button, we have a next button. When we click this, we're met with a list that we can select which dependencies that we want to have in our application. This is specific to spring.io, so if you go to that website, you'll get the same options as you do here. We can search for anything. Say we want to get Spring Data JPA, we can select it, and now it'll be a part of our application. Going back, we have a selection for Java FX. And this will be creating GUI applications in the Java FX platform. Again, all of the properties over here on the right are the same. We have a Quarkus selection, which is very similar to the Spring Boot one. You'll want to make sure that your JDK and your Java version are the same. And then you hit next, and you're met again with a list, just like the Spring Boot version. Going over to Micronaut, again, this is another very similar configuration to the Quarkus and Spring Boot one, but this works with just this front-end application called Micronaut. If we hit next, well, we have to change the Java version. If we hit next, we're again met with a bunch of options specific to the Micronaut framework. With Ktor, this allows us to create very simple asynchronous client and server applications. And in here, you have a few options. One is your website name, and this will be the domain that you use to determine the package name. The next is the artifact ID, just like the Maven and Gradle versions. And then it's the engine, where you can select either Netty, Jetty, CIO, or Tomcat. Again, you can add sample code, and under advanced settings, we're given a build system where we can change from a Gradle build system to a Maven one. And you can also select a different Ktor version, as well as some configuration, whether it's in the code, in a YAML file, or in a HOCON file. Moving back to Compose for Desktop, this allows you to create multi-platform desktop applications. And you'll notice all of the properties are pretty much the same as what we've already talked about. Play is a web framework that allows you to create web applications using Scala or Java. And again, this is all similar things to what we've seen. We can select a different Play version if we'd like, as well as a different Scala or simple build tool version. If we select Java, we get the same options. The rest of these generators down here are not specific to IntelliJ, and they're actually web front-end frameworks that will create a node application for you. What's neat about IntelliJ is that you can actually build any type of project inside of it. But there may be better alternatives or better IDEs to use for a specific use case. For these cases where we have HTML, React, Express, Angular CLI, Vue, and Vite, each one of these can be made inside of IntelliJ, or you can use a different IDE like WebStorm to create your project, and it may be a better fit for you. I'm not going to necessarily go through these generators because they are specific to web apps and node applications. But I just want you to be aware that there is WebStorm available to you if you want to use that for your web app application development. You also have an option here at the bottom for more plugins. When you click this, you're met with a few other languages. And just like in the node projects, these specific languages actually have their own IDE inside of JetBrains. While you can create projects inside of IntelliJ for these languages, it may be better off to download the specific IDE for each one of these. So 90% of the time, I'll be selecting one of the options under New Project. For now, I'll click Java. I'll let it be Maven, and I'll click Create. Now IntelliJ is generating our boilerplate code, and you'll see since I selected to create a Git repository, it gave me the option to add the POM to my Git repository. I go to main. I can see that this is some boilerplate code that it's created. And you'll notice on the left-hand side that my main exists right here, as well as since I selected the Maven build system, there's a pom.xml with my configurations in it. Now, if I go to main and I hit run, you can see that it prints out hello world. Now, if you open up IntelliJ and you open it up to the editor screen and not the initial creation screen, what you can do is come up here to the upper left, click the three dots for the main menu, go to new, and then go to project. And it will open that same screen that we've just been talking about. If I hit cancel and I close this project, I come back to this screen. Now, I don't have those three options down here. Instead, they moved up to the upper right where I can select new project, open an existing one, or get one from our version control system. And with that, that is how you create a new project in IntelliJ.